Tuesday, the 28th of August, 2018. I'm Jake Morphonios with Blackstone Intelligence. I spent today checking with my sources who have information relevant to the ongoing hostilities in Syria, and I've got some very important intel to share with you all. Now, I went online just before I started filming to check to see if the mainstream media outlets are talking about any of this. There is absolutely nothing right now on CNN, on MSNBC, on Fox News about what I'm about to tell you. There's nothing even on Drudge Report with its dozens of links. This story is so big that the total Western media blackout is evidence that our media is in bed with United States intelligence and actively hides crucial information from the American public. That's why you've got Blackstone Intelligence, to tell you those things that the mainstream media won't tell you. First, a little background. As you know, the Central Intelligence Agency has been conducting a joint operation with the Israeli Mossad to try and destabilize Syrian society, to try and overthrow the government of President Bashar al-Assad. And with the assistance of CIA assets like the recently departed Senator John McCain, the CIA has been coordinating the arming and the mobilization of extremist, mercenary, and terrorist groups in Syria, and this includes the notorious Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front. Well, these various groups, back in 2014, they merged together to form the powerful terrorist network known as ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. For the last several years, though, what we've seen is U.S., Israeli, and Saudi Arabian-backed terrorist groups that have been in Syria waging an unprecedented campaign of blood and terror against the civilian population in Syria, as the Syrian army has been trying to liberate the country. These terrorists have butchered thousands upon thousands of innocent men, women, and children. And the stories are just legion of what they've done. They often raped the women in front of their husbands. Then they would cut the men's heads off in front of the families so that the violation of their wives and daughters would be the very last thing that these men ever saw in this life. These CIA and Mossad assets then would sell the children into the global sex slave trade, which the CIA helps to coordinate. And they would also use a lot of these people that they took captive as slaves and would use them for organ harvesting to raise money on the black market to help fund some of their operations, and also to strike just absolute fear into the hearts of the people. So with the ongoing logistical, financial, and other support that the United States has been giving and our allies have been giving, this group, this network of ISIS and its various affiliates, they managed to take control of a large part of Syria, which sent millions of its citizens fleeing into other countries, which created an unprecedented immigrant crisis. But then Vladimir Putin stepped in, and he sent in Russian forces to try and prop up the Assad regime. This week, Russian Defense Ministry spokesman revealed that so far, since Russia entered this Syrian hostility, they have sent over 63,000 Russian troops have actually participated in the fighting in Syria. Iran also sent some of its Revolutionary Guard to defend the Syrian government, as did the Lebanese Hezbollah. And together, the coalition of Syria, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, they have fought relentlessly against the U.S., Israeli, Saudi terrorist network to keep us from overthrowing them. So, the CIA and Mossad, with the help of the British version of the CIA, which is the MI6, and along with their Al-Qaeda affiliated white helmets, they have staged multiple false flag chemical attacks to justify a massive military response by the United States and our allies. And we've seen that President Donald Trump has twice attacked Syria with cruise missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, airstrikes, and so forth. We've seen that the Israeli Air Force has relentlessly invaded invaded the sovereign Syrian territory to carry out their own airstrikes to try and keep the ISIS forces in control of key cities from falling. And the most recent of these false flag attacks we saw took place back in April 7th, I think it was, of 2018, took place in Douma. Douma is just a few miles outside of the Syrian capital of Damascus. The main terrorist faction that's in control of Douma, by the way, is Jaish al-Islam, and they are primarily funded by Saudi Arabia. Well, Jaish al-Islam was holding the residents of Douma hostage, had been for years. The Syrian government couldn't get in and liberate them without sacrificing a lot of the civilian lives there in the process. And that's partly because Jaish al-Islam was taking the residents and using them as human shields to try and stop the Syrian Air Force from being able to attack and retake the city. And in the past, I've shown you guys photos and video evidence that is showing Jaish al-Islam taking civilians, hundreds of them, putting them in cages. And they literally took over 100 cages and positioned them around Douma in strategically important locations to try and stop the Syrian Air Force from attacking. But by the end of May of this year, the Syrian coalition that had been backed by Russia had been able to bring Jaish al-Islam to its knees, and this terror group was actually in the process of negotiating a surrender. They were going to let go of the city in exchange for passage to another part of Syria to continue their fighting, but somewhere else. And because they were getting ready to lose this key strategic point, that's when the MI6, part of the Western Intelligence Coalition, helped to carry out this alleged chemical attack on Douma. And we saw footage ad nauseum in Western media that was filmed by the White Helmets, allegedly showing these parents and others, medical professionals, rinsing off children in the hospital, trying to get chemical residue off them so they don't die because there was a chemical weapons attack, and which turned out to be false, of course. That's not what it was. Trump said that he was going to, they've crossed another red line, we got to attack. But Russia called for an investigation and said, look, let's have a neutral international watchdog group come in, do the scientific studies, examine the bodies, and see, was there actually a chemical attack? Because we say there wasn't. Well, Trump refused to wait. This was too good to let go. And so they carried out a massive bombardment of Syrian sites all around the country. And months later, when this watchdog group did eventually get their findings out, what these international investigators said was that nobody died from a chemical attack in Douma. Their scientific report proved with actual scientific studies and evidence that the whole thing was not true. U.S. airstrikes were completely unjustified, but conveniently, the Western media was silent on this report. They did not go back and say, and that tells you something. CNN, which hates Donald Trump and is relentlessly attacking Donald Trump, did not. They had the perfect opportunity to really hit at Trump's credibility by coming out and saying, look, here's the report. As it turns out, these people did not die of a chemical weapons attack, and here's the science to prove it, which means Donald Trump's warmongering was unjustified. That's the kind of thing that if the left wants to impeach Donald Trump, there you go. That could have been used, but they didn't use it, which tells you something. The priority here was to keep the story out. That's because the media is controlled by the intelligence community. And the reason that I give you guys this background is because we are in a similar situation again, and as it stands, the last major holdout of these U.S.-backed terrorists, they're still all over the place, but the last major holdout in Syria is in the northwestern city of Idlib. And the Syrian army has Idlib surrounded. They are on the verge of defeating the U.S.-backed forces, which would effectively mark the victory of President Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian Arab Army over the CIA's terrorist network that they're using. But we've already seen that when the Syrian army is on the verge of a major strategic victory, such as their victory in Douma, what ends up happening, allegedly, is that the Syrian army goes and carries out a nonsensical, completely unproductive chemical attack to slaughter the very civilian population that they have been giving their lives trying to liberate. And then these false flag attacks have been followed by massive U.S. military intervention to try and prevent these U.S.-backed forces from being defeated by Syria. So Russian military intelligence has been claiming this week that it has reason to believe that yet another one of these false flag attacks is imminent, could be carried out within days. An incident that would be used as justification by the United States and Israel to carry out major strikes against the Syrian coalition. And given that Russia had correctly predicted a false flag attack before it took place in Douma, I think we have every reason to give consideration to these new claims by Russia. And when I checked with what the United States government is saying on this matter, they're not silent. Not surprisingly, the National Security Council actually spoke to CNN, which is one of its propaganda mouthpieces. And here's what they said. Here's a direct quote from the National Security Council. Quote, "The Syrian regime retains chemical weapons and could use them again, particularly if it launches a large-scale offensive in Idlib." So they're saying in advance, we're kind of expecting there to be a chemical attack by Syria against the civilians. And further evidence that the United States is planning on trying to carry out another one of these attacks, a third major cruise missile attack against Syria, and that they're planning on doing it in the immediate future, is the fact that United States naval vessels that are armed with cruise missiles have already been dispatched to the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Syria. Among the sources that I checked with, three of them told me that, and this is confirmed in other places as well that you can verify in public media sources, that the USS Carney has already transited through the Bosphorus toward the Mediterranean. One of my sources said that the Turkish Coast Guard, the TCSG-29, escorted the USS Carney out through the Turkish Straits into the Mediterranean. Now, if you go to the U.S. Navy's own website, here's the mission of the USS Carney. It is to, quote, "conduct prompt, sustained combat operations at sea in support of U.S. national policy. She is equipped to operate independently in a high-density, multi-threat environment or as a member of a carrier strike group or expeditionary strike group. The Carney is equipped with the world's most sophisticated weaponry systems. She's fitted with the Spy-1D phased array radar and missiles that reach extended ranges. She can take out air targets with the Phalanx close-in weapon system, and this ship has got Tomahawk cruise missiles, they've got Harpoon anti-service missiles, on and on. So, and by the way, the military-industrial complex, some of the war industry corporations, including Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, they've just had a field day with equipping the Carney. The Carney has the most modern weapons out there. They've got supersonic self-guided missiles and everything. So, given the fact that the USS Carney has already played a major role in past events, especially back in April with Trump's last cruise missile strike, the Carney's movement toward the Syrian coast, along with some other U.S. Warships, that's very suspect to say the least. What is the United States planning on doing here? Why are they moving people in just like they did before the April 2018 strike, before the April 2017 strike as well? So Russia is not taking any of this lying down. We know that in April of this year, there was essentially an agreement during the last U.S. strike in which Russia essentially stood down and let Trump have his way rather than risk direct warfare between Russia and the United States. But in fact, yesterday, the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman, Major General Igor Konashenkov, he said on behalf of the Russian government that Russia is aware that right now, they're not naming which country, but they're saying English-speaking specialists are already in place in the northwestern Hama province there in Syria, and that these English-speaking specialists intend to carry out a false flag attack using what he says are poisonous agents. And Konashenkov said that these Western agents are planning to carry out the attack when the Syrian Air Force begins its final push to liberate Idlib, which is imminent. He said that this false flag is going to be made to look like the Syrian forces dropped barrel bombs full of chemical munitions on the civilian population. Okay, it's the exact same thing that they alleged back in April. They're going to use the same thing again. Now, Konashenkov was even more specific in his statement. He said that these English-speaking agents that are already on the ground have already transported a group of anti-Assad civilians, people that are loyal to the U.S.-backed terrorist forces, that they have already moved a group of these people into place. In essence, these are crisis actors, people who Konashenkov says is going to help the White Helmet out a psyop to create propaganda footage that the Western media like CNN can use to justify a new U.S. coalition attack on the country. Now, the village where these people have been transported to, according to Russian Defense Intelligence, is Kafr Zida. This is about 6 miles southwest of Khan Sheikhoun. You may remember Khan Sheikhoun back in April of 2017. That was the town where the first major chemical attack took place that Trump used to justify his first attack. Now, let me read a direct quote to you from the Russian Defense Ministry. Quote, "The United States keeps," and this is from this week, "the United States keeps building up the cruise missile carrier group in the Middle East as part of preparations for another provocation in Idlib province to be presented as an alleged use of chemical weapons. These preparations are fresh confirmation of U.S. intentions to use a pretext as a likely simulation of the government forces chemical attack, which Hayat Tahrir al-Sham militants are plotting with active support from British secret services." Folks, that is pretty doggone specific. And I want to add that it's not just the United States that is moving warships right now into the Mediterranean. We've also got France and Great Britain that are moving warships in. That's exactly what happened back in April. It was a joint operation between the United States, France, and Great Britain. They all participated in these cruise missile strikes. France, Macron in France, he really wants to beat his chest and seem like he's a tough guy. Try and shed himself of this metrosexual image that he's got. Wants to be a big player on the international stage. Well, the Russian Defense Ministry is putting this information out because they hope that by preempting this Western false flag operation with their announcement, that it will help to thwart the operation, that the CIA will have to call it off, that the MI6 will have to call off what they're doing. But because they had warned previously and it didn't do anything, didn't do any good, because Western media doesn't get the word out to the people, they're not pinning all their hopes on this. Now, as I said before, Russia they've accurately predicted this. They know that Western media is not going to cover this. So, Russia is preparing for war. The Russian Navy has dispatched its biggest armada to the Mediterranean, right there outside of Syria. Largest deployment since the start of the Syrian conflict. They've moved their Tor M2 surface-to-air missile systems in place. They've got 2 frigates carrying Caliber cruise missiles into place. And according to one of my sources, Russia will have, just within the next 24 to 48 hours, they'll have at least 4 frigates, 2 destroyers, 1 cruiser, a large number of patrol vessels, a large number of missile vessels, along with other boats and attack submarines. So the buildup of the Russian Navy off the Syrian coast is absolutely massive. Why is the United States media, and I haven't checked British media, but I'm assuming it's the same, why are they so silent on this? We've got the 2 sides of a potential World War III scenario sending their navies into the same cramped space in advance of a major military operation. This is a very dangerous escalation. Now, perhaps nothing will happen. Perhaps just the presence. This is all posturing. It's a game of chicken. Let's hope that's what it is. But don't the American people deserve to at least know what's going on? And another thing, one of my sources told me that, based on the radar that they've got, U.S. Lockheed P-3 Orion reconnaissance planes have also jacked up their activity the last couple of days. And we saw this back in April in the week leading up to the U.S. coalition attack. They're doing recon. So heads up, everybody. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. Please don't think that I'm trying to suggest we're on the cusp of World War III. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that a military operation of this scale, this magnitude, is something that we ought to be hearing about. Instead, all we've got are constant tributes to John McCain, who backed these ISIS rebels, terrorists, who provided logistical support, funding, everything else that he could provide, coordinating that with, by the way, Evan McMullin, the CIA spook, who ran for president to try and stop Trump from winning Utah and hoping to throw the election to Hillary Clinton. So hopefully the buildup of these Russian warships will convey to Trump, look, it's not really worth it. It's not worth the risk to carry out another one of these big strikes. Hopefully this will discourage May and Macron and all of these other New World Order lackeys from carrying out another major... Chicken, chicken, boom, boom. Would there be enough room? Chicken, 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 boom, 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 boom. Chicken, chicken, will there be enough room, room, room? Unjustified military operations. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted, so make sure to click the bell icon that's next to the subscription button there on your page. That way you'll get alerts about my new videos. And folks, if you support my investigative reporting, if you like that you can get the news from me before the mainstream media touches any of this, please support my work. I spent a lot of time contacting my sources and maintaining relationships with journalists and other people around the world. You can support my work at patreon.com/endtimesnewsreport, paypal.me/endtimesnewsreport. You can also send a check or money